Hello, welcome to New York Truck Stop Video, the voice of small business in New York, presented by NewYorkTruckStop.com, the law office of Arthur Miller, and New York Truck Stop Radio, every Saturday at 1 p.m. on AM 970 The Answer and AM 570 The Mission. I'm Zach Miller.
And I'm Arthur Miller. Thank you very much for
There
joining.
we go. Thank you. So
there we go. So
no, go ahead.
No. So anyway, we're still in the throes of the COVID pandemic. Today is Tuesday, the 12th of May, and we're very glad you're joining with us. A lot of people are talking about what's the city, what's the state, what's the world going to be like as we deal with the pandemic. What's the new normal? And certainly we talk about transportation, we talk about small business, but just living and working in New York, there are a lot of things that we see. Certainly you go to the stores, you go on the streets, things are going to be different. It's not going to come back. Things are not going to come back all the same. Anyway, the IBM company, you've heard of them. They released a study last week, which had some interesting details. Looking into, they did a survey nationally of 25,000 adults in the month of April to get an idea of how COVID-19 has affected their perspectives on a number of issues. And we'll talk about that a little bit because it's important to hear what others are saying. So, Zach,
yeah, and the link. I'll talk about it. Let me just say that the link is going to be included in the video. The link will be there. But yeah, there are two things about this study that really they stood out, not necessarily because they were so groundbreaking. It was more like they reaffirmed a lot of the things that we believed would be the case, and that not just Arthur and myself, just people we talked to believed. And the two big ones are that people who had the ability to work remotely, work from home, got very comfortable doing that and will prefer to continue working from home remotely for the foreseeable future, which ties into the fact that people are very, very, very hesitant to return to mass transit. These are big issues. These are long-term issues. And, for a place like New York City, which was designed around, large commercial areas in Manhattan, to be accessed by the subway, that will have very serious effects on this city and downtown urban areas in general. I mean, I could tell you, for me personally,
Yeah.
I have no interest in riding the subway until there's a vaccine or a treatment. I mean, that's just the truth. So there's one less subway rider for the city for the next year and a half, and that means that cities, which are not great at adapting, have to adapt to a very scary and very different new normal, and how they do that will determine whether they survive or not.
Right, especially if we want economies to pick up again. So economies aren't coming back to exactly what was. So it will be gradual, and it's going to have to grow, and it's going to have to take into consideration many of the things that are going on. So one of the things that they mentioned is certainly personal mobility will likely be very different. They said that more than 20% of the respondents who regularly used buses and subways and mass transit said that they no longer would. And another 28% that they'll likely use public transportation a lot less often. They also said that a lot of people expect to, if they have cars, to be driving more often. and that probably and there's a large number who said that they were not inclined to spring for app-based transportation like Uber or Lyft. So those factors are really going to come into play. Particularly in the metropolitan area, New York City to be sure, but others. If the hope that white collar office workers are going to come back, like I said, we already mentioned, we've been hearing that some firms are reserving off-street parking space for some of their employees to come back. There will likely be traffic, to be sure, but because it will be so gradual, I don't think it's going to be a traffic Armageddon, because you're going to have
not
many
at all.
who will be, if they come in, it will be, first of all, places will open gradually. We've been hearing of offices, some big firms saying that they don't expect to really reopen until like Labor Day. So even then, you'll have more people coming in, maybe one day a week or something like that. You'll have split shifts. You'll have more effort of people working. We're talking about the white collar workers working from home, things like that. And then, of course, in other areas, there'll be less pressure for parking, as people aren't necessarily going to have to ditch their cars and and then get on the subway or go to other appointments. So, but parking will still be critical if we want people to come in, and that's both off street and on street. If we want people to get back to work, and of course, you're going to need parking for deliveries. So, that's a hugely important issue.
Yeah, it's one of the questions that they didn't ask in the survey, but I think is really important that people start asking is how's your shopping habits change? They talked a little bit about retail in terms of curbside, but what's more interesting is the business to consumer delivery model shift that we talk about on a show and on the website. But this is really important too, because if people are going out less, going out to work less, they're not really commuting. They're not really going out shopping as much.
And they're also not going out to restaurants either. So
they're not going out to restaurants. We'll talk about restaurants a little bit later. But they're ordering their supplies, whatever they need in the course of their daily life, to their home. That changes the entire supply chain. I mean, the supply model, the delivery model. So these are major issues that cities need to be working on, that needs to be ready for this, next year to 2 year situation that we're in. So,
right.
It's, you have, I mean, think about, I certainly have sympathy and respect for the people in city government who have to figure this out, because you're talking about a mass transit system that is not going to be utilized. You're talking about private transportation,
which is very expensive to run, by the way.
Which is exactly. And now you're talking about private transportation, which is going to increase, but we don't even know the exact flow of the traffic, plus the whole delivery model shift. Again, I guess that's easier to predict the flows of, because you know where people live and by income, but still, it's the roads and certainly the parking. It's not quite designed for everybody ordering everything they need to their homes, and this is major stuff here. And I'm glad IBM is looking at this. I know MIT did a study, so it's nice that smart people and organizations are really looking at this. But it is just we talk about the second wave of coronavirus. Well, this whole new wave of doing business, I think, is really going to get a lot of cities swept up, and that's something to be mindful of, and to make sure you call your city leaders, your elected officials, and let them know, like, hey, are you guys looking at this? Are you guys on top of this? What's going to happen with they're thinking about it, but just make sure. It never hurts to double check.
Absolutely. So the IBM study does point out that particularly, certainly people are going to want to be conserving money for a while, so they're going to be
Yeah,
cutting down on their major purchases for most of the country, but not as much the Northeast. People are limiting their shopping now to only what they deem to be essential. But in the Northeast, they expect a lot more online. So that goes to what Zach's saying. It's like we want stuff online, and you can see on any street who's coming to deliver it. Aside from the bike messengers and others, but there's FedEx, there's UPS, there's the post office, there's private Amazon trucks. So for any household, and then multiply. Let's say you have a multifamily building. How many different vehicles are going to be coming to that building every single day? So the issue with all of those deliveries and how those get through, especially when people are either talking about closing streets or taking away parking, let's say for a bike lane or whatever, people are going to want their stuff. And if that helps keep the economy going, I think we want them to be able to get their stuff. So, these are
yeah,
things that we have to think about.
and something has to keep the economy going, because people aren't going to gather in mass. They're not. Tourism is going to be way down until there's a vaccine or treatment. Commuting to centralized offices way down until there's a vaccine or treatment. It is an interesting opportunity, I think, to rethink the supply chain and to rethink manufacturing, to make sure we produce more and more of the goods that we need right here in the state, or in the region, instead of having to get it from China or India or even California. It's a good opportunity to look at what was wrong and fix it, and to sort of get on top of some of these changes instead of having to play catch up, because that's really dangerous too. And I think that does sort of speak to some of the issues with bike lanes. Is that, are we talking about creating more space for people in communities who have been hit really hard by COVID to be able to go out and exercise without being on top of each other? Are we talking about a way for more people to commute? Because that might not make as much sense as giving people space in their communities. And what about restaurants? What about providing outdoor space so people can sit outside, feel comfortable sitting outside and patronizing these restaurants, these independent, community restaurants that we all need? It's funny. It's like everything else, right? There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And if it's done the wrong way, the consequences could be really dire.
Right. From a safety point of view and the economy. So,
Yeah,
let's say if the and this isn't really addressed by either of these reports, but let's say the reopening of restaurants will entail, at least for the warmer weather, more outside seating and maybe curbside pickup.
yeah,
So to have more curbside pickup. So we have to worry about who's going to have access to that curbside pickup, and how will that interfere, either with bike or pedestrian or car traffic. So those are safety issues and of course economic issues as well. So
that's a terrific point.
there's a lot there.
No,
So there's a
that's
lot
really a terrific
to be
point.
seen. But Zach, you touched on two things that I wanted to get into. One, getting back to the IBM thing, the study also showed that that there's been more of and hopefully this is so, a priority for shopping local, to be able to sort of go out and get what they need and not to have to worry so much about the supply chain. And I think if anything, this whole pandemic issue has sort of exposed the weaknesses in stretching the supply chain too thin, which is what you were talking about, Zach. I mean, I was in Home Depot over the weekend, and it blew my mind that now all of a sudden they have pallets full of um, um, bleach and what it goes, stuff to clean, disinfectants and stuff from two
Yeah.
different manufacturers. And I'm thinking to myself, it only took 2 months from the time, from when people started cleaning the stores out of this stuff to be able to get sufficient supplies of that in Home Depot. It's like, gee, if this was a real emergency, what would we do?
Yeah, right. Well, I'll tell you what, to that point, I went grocery shopping today, this afternoon. And, I think I mentioned it before, but I live right by a major commercial strip. And there's a TGI Fridays on my block, and they were selling toilet paper. And then the block over, there's a pawn shop, and they were selling hand sanitizer.
Don't tell me the pawn shop was selling toilet paper.
No, the pawn shop was selling hand sanitizer. But yeah, I mean, that would be a funny meme right there if the pawn shop was selling toilet paper. But it's remarkable, just like that, the complete shift. And yeah, even Home Depot, forget about for a second the bleach and that. Just the fact that people have to do it, more do-it-yourself type of repair projects, because they don't know if they may not want the plumber coming into the home, or is the plumber even working, or the carpenter, or or could we have a roofer come in, or do I have to do, it's just like a whole new mindset for people of things that we all took for granted. Not only that we took for granted, but that makes the economy go. The plumber, the carpenter, the local restaurant, this is how you build a sustainable economy. And how do you rebuild an economy without stuff like this? It's impossible.
Right. Very, very true. We extended ourselves way too thin. We were way too out on a limb. And I'm glad you mentioned that. The reason I went to Home Depot was because I had a leak under the kitchen sink, and I had to replace some piping. So, of course, I couldn't get a plumber, and had to wait 20 minutes online just to get into Home Depot, and then obviously I have to figure out for myself how to fix the corroded pipes. So, because there's no local hardware store. It wasn't all that long ago when I could go to the local hardware store that I could just walk to. I'd go in and talk to the folks there, explain my problem, and they go in the back and say, here, you need this and you need that, and this is how you do it. So, something is lost when we lose all of those kind of things, which segues also to, I think, one of the big problems and one of the reasons we were so out on a limb, which goes, to increasing homelessness in New York, and it goes to the density, and it goes to the traffic, and it goes to things like losing these stores, is that there's been too much centralized management. There's too much top-down management, and the local communities have been stripped of their power, and people really do not have a say. People have been disenfranchised. Everything from schools in New York, where kids go to high schools and in all different communities. They don't even stay. People don't get to know their neighbors even anymore. Community boards do not necessarily have the ability to approve the proposal for the transportation project or for certain other things. So zoning seems to be coming from a centralized city planning commission, and the end results are, like we said, homelessness has doubled over the last couple of years. Small businesses have been lost. Many jobs have been lost. It's so many things, I think, that has left our communities all the weaker, and less able to confront the COVID problem than we should. So, these are things to think about as we discuss rebuilding New York.
Yeah, and that's definitely the concern. I think is top-down management coming in to rebuild it. The same way they messed it up in the first place, for lack of a better phrasing. We talked about the governor's advisory panel this weekend. The mayor announced his advisory panels. I think the mayor's panels actually make a little bit more sense. He divided it by topic, so to speak, by industry. He didn't name as many people, so you could figure that his meetings might be more productive. And I think he actually cast a wider net than the governor did. But still, you are still talking about a lot of top-down management. You're talking about a lot of people, stakeholders who are not included, which is always a big issue. And you would think that would be goal number one in terms of rebuilding. It's like, well, let's make sure all stakeholders are involved. It's still not exactly that case. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens with all that. But it's tough. It's really tough for people who have spent 2 months worrying about their health and their family's health and their finances and their business and all that. And then it's like every time there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel, it just like sort of quickly gets covered up by something else. And that's really causing, I think, a lot of difficulties for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and another thing to think about it, and we talk about it a lot on our radio show and here, is that the politicians are supposed to work for us, not to do the bidding of the special interests and the special agenda. And it's up to us to remind them that that they need us. And it's so important to speak your mind, reach out to your legislators, reach out to whatever groups that associations and things like that represent your interests, chambers of commerce, local organizations, unions, if you're in a union, things like that, because they have your interests, and there's more power in a group, of course. But we've had several different legislators on our show, and they always say letters to their office, phone calls. They pay attention to that stuff. So a friend of ours, wisely said, a lot of New Yorkers complain, but in the end, they don't. They just get up and leave rather than fight. So it's just very important, to make your opinion known about what you want the city and the state, for that matter, to look like. And again, government. Zach, you mentioned that the MIT study had some comments that you thought was like a little bit more government involvement. Recommending it was, that the government and be more involved in things, but. It was more big government than I expected from an MIT study. I'll make sure I post that link as well. And not that I thought the ideas were unreasonable. MIT business school.
Yeah, I thought the ideas were for the most part reasonable, but it was big government, and that surprised me. From MIT,
right? But the interesting thing is, I think one of the problems with our American economy and society is that. We almost worshipped all these quote unquote smart business people, anybody who had a more clever idea. And, and certainly there were some, politicians on the mantra, that government was the problem. We have to get it out of the way. But you can't, there are services that need to be assured, and we cannot always depend on business to provide those services. And it's up to government, and the government is us. We are the government, to make sure that there are appropriate safety nets, and that there are backups. Whether we have sufficient hospital space, or that homelessness isn't increasing, and things like that. So it's nice to have business be unfettered, but the quote unquote adult in the room still has to be government, sort of saying, we need certain things at a minimum, and those things have to be provided. So, government has its role, and we have to make sure that government asserts itself in the reinvention of our city and state and our economy.
Oh, that's definitely true, and that's one of the things that a lot of people are really asking for. What? Oh, sorry. No, a lot of things that people are asking for is a more equitable economy, which I think is really good and the way it should be. But that starts in the communities. So definitely make sure
Absolutely.
you reach out.
I think that's
No, go ahead.
No, I was going exactly where you are. Definitely
Okay, go ahead.
that's a good place
You
to
do it.
conclude. Community, and again, that includes your associations, your politicians, or whatever. Reach out to people, make your positions known. We are going to get through this. It is the definition of normal will be different. It'll be a new normal, but it's up to all of us to make sure our voices are heard about how we envision that and what we need. So.
Send
we
an
have
email
the potential, and we've got to act.
To Zach at ZACH at NewYorkTruckStop.com, Arthur at NewYorkTruckStop.com. You give us a call, 718-997-0641. Listen to our show every Saturdays, 1 p.m., AM 970 The Answer, AM 570 The Mission. We'll see you guys next time. Stay safe.